And basically it begins with the moves of d4, knight f6 or d5, knight f3, e6, and bishop g5. And what I'm talking about is a so-called Torre Attack. See, Torre Attack isn't known as the most dangerous opening weapon. Neither it is known to be the most brilliant sequence for white. But what the Torre Attack does is that it provides white with one of the most efficient types of development that one can get. And based on that, based on the possibility for white to develop as easily and as effectively, he can do so much more as the game progresses. And I want to show you a couple of examples. For example, let's suppose that people will do here d5. You know, this could actually go in the transposition in case we play d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop g5, and e6. This is a very common way for black to respond. Now what's important about this is that as soon as he plays with the move of e6, white can do knight bd2. And then we realize that there is a very strong intention for white to deliver the move of pawn up to the e4. That intention, we can say, leads to many other qualities that are about to be expressed within the next moves. The most important of which is most naturally the idea that white is going to build up a pawn structure that helps him with a long-term activity against the black king. Here is how that may work. After bishop e7 on its own, ultimately white can do the move of e3. And then the basic idea is that when black picks up to do short castling, most natural kind of candidate, we're going to play bishop d3, c5, and c3. The pawn structure serves as an actual shield, protecting and keeping white's pieces around behind. You could see that these 5 pawns create a sort of chain that almost looks impenetrable by most of black's pieces. Underneath it, as you could see, white is actually building up the key to what I would actually consider a successful opening. We see that there is the minor pieces, the knight and the bishop, the other knight that can actually come out on the f5, and there's so much more that he could actually build up and continue with if he chooses to set out his pawn on the f4 and the queen on f3 as the game progresses. This is a wonderful way of playing it. Now, something I want to mention about this structure is that people often get very unhappy about this exact sequence, and what you would often get to see is a move of the kind like, say, c takes d4. They would try to change it. The good news is that changing it with a move of c takes to the d4 really does not change all that much. And you could see how favorable this could actually turn out for white, especially if he gets to play with the move of e takes to the d. E takes to the d is one of the most terrific moves because, first of all, it gives us the opened e file, which is very necessary for the upcoming activity on the king's side. And also, another thing that it is doing is that after black plays knight c6, castles, bishop d7, and queen e2, white is more than well prepared and really strongly set to continue building on that king's side area of the board. There is knight e5, there is f4, and there is definitely a lot more moves that are going to help white to just continue building on that side of the board. Bringing up the rooks and then the pawns as well as any of the other pieces is simply monstrous. Not only because the majority of black's own pieces are not going to be there and not going to do anything, but also because we could see the power of every force that white's going to get once the rook reaches out. Moving it directly through the h3, pushing up for the f4 and then potentially g4, as well as just, really maintaining that outpost of the knight on the e5 is quite perfect. It is a really, really good order and a sequence to play along with. Now, what I'd like to mention is that, this is often underestimated by most players because they don't get to see how directly white will succeed with his attack against black's king. But even though that's not very clear, we understand the two major advantages of this plan over black's position. First is that apparently white's major target is the black king. Nothing can compare to it. Whatever weaknesses black intends to follow or focus upon, nothing will be even remotely equal to the idea of attacking the king. And then the second thing that actually adds a lot of value to this position is the idea that in the end of the day, white is a lot faster. See, it would take many, many moves for white to bring any good forces and pressure around that queenside area. At the same time, you see that white is going to actually start creating the threats within no more than two to three moves. So you could see that, you know, within a very short set of time moves, it will actually guarantee everything that white is going to do is going to help him to brilliantly support an attack, directly on the king's side. So this is why I would consider this to be a very good line. Now, of course, this is in case black plays with c6 to the d. But what goes in case he tries to play smarter? For instance, one of the best ways for black to play could be to play b6 or knight c6. If he plays knight c6, I would always recommend knight to the e4. The reason for that is because once the knight comes out to the e4 square, e5, we're preparing for the f5 and queen f3. The stonewall structure, which now works really well because white is missing the possibly bad bishop on c1, simply fits incredibly well with the idea of a subsequent kingside attack out there. And then you get to see all those things that are really going to take place. For example, in case of knight x d5, white can do d x d5. Commonly, the move of knight d7 could be eventually responded by the move of bishop f4. I mean, there is so much more that is very gradually executed and well played with moves like queen h5, knight f3, and even bishop h6 that white can heavily rely on all these ideas to, just build up his attack and enhance it quite quickly. What I would like to say, too, is that black does not have these opportunities. Let's take a look and see why. If black attempts to play a move of f6, that actually means white can choose to play with e takes f. I'd always recommend that e takes f is slightly better. If black attempts to take with the knight, we're going to have knight f3 and an opportunity to advance, and here it looks wonderful. That e5 square is going to guarantee white not just a good blockade, but also a nice pathway for the rest of the pieces to move forth. So black will eventually try and attempt bishop takes f6. Makes more sense, as this move actually prepares black down for e5, and then maybe if he actually does get to play the move of e5, he could push against the bishop and utilize a pretty good strategy there, against our center. Does that mean that we're losing or this is going to be bad? No, not at all. We just have to be more careful. Queen c2 is perfect. As a starting line, that move looks wonderful. If black attempts to do h6 now, preparing and doing e5 next move, we might as well get to play with bishop to the d6. We'll force the black bishop to move out, and then we can just get our own bishop right down to g3. What I really like about this sequence is that now it creates the illusion that black may actually get to play with e5 and succeed. And why is this an illusion? Because in reality you can't. There is no real support underneath the black center, and you could see that type of sequence just really wouldn't work. As soon as c4 is being played, in case of an exchange, apparently black will be left with a lot of weaknesses. And in case of d4, every single piece that you'd care about is going to be away. White can cast a short or even long, as of that matter. Play for queen to the h7, consider advancing through the e4, and really keeping tension against both the queen side as well as black center. That will actually, stand terrible. Awesome sequence, and the line is terrific. One of the key things is that after white gets to castle alongside, should black choose to move differently, maybe we could say with the move queen to the b6, that's going to be a great opportunity for white to build and actually move past this by simply concentrating the extra forces that are given immediately on the king, on the center. There is an idea of edicts to the d. There is an idea to get the bishops into play, and there is so much more. Remember, though, that it is the build-up that helps white to succeed, not the immediate tactical sequences or complications. So what do we say about that position after rook e1? Well, the reality is that after rook e1, he's going to have enough to worry, and I have to admit, too, that it's just not a very comfortable position. Rook e1 might force black to eventually do knight bishop f6, and then knight e4. In case black does not go this way, a very tricky order on how some people are trying to implement this structure of development is by playing b5 and then attempting to do the quick bishop b7 with a plan to challenge the knight with knight e4. It is indeed a tricky thing, because a knight on the e4 is going to certainly undermine a lot of the qualities that white is looking for, and it's just not a very nice thing to have. So what do we do then, given that the bishop and the knight of black are already setting up for a powerful plan? Or in that specific case scenario, I would rather think that most likely queen f3 will do the job. Now we're going to use another idea to that is pretty similar to a close opening. I'm talking about the London system. With the queen on f3, white's taking away the e4 square, so the black cannot advance his knight on that spot. And then the other thing that comes out of it is that after queen f3, knight d7, and possibly a move like even h4 or alongside castles, the reality is that white has a lot of possibilities for attacking. Looking at black, he's a little limited. For instance, white can even castle short. This is considered very anti-positional because you might actually just confront the move by saying, alright, but I don't know, what would it really do if the king is there? It doesn't feel like it's actually a good candidate, and it doesn't feel like it will do anything all that great. Well, the reality is that once white castles short, he has a good stability onto the e4 square, which really holds black down for a while. And then later, wherever black jumps into play, whether it's going to be with a move like rook e8 or anything else, white can simply command his pieces, queen h3, f4, and everything. The idea is to make knight e4 difficult for black, in any way we can. For instance, in here, queen g3 may actually be a pretty good idea. It sets up threats like knight g6 and others, while f4 is still there. If black is tricky and he plays a waiting move, waiting for us to get the queen out so that he can move the knight right down, it's actually alright, because a move of knight e4 in that particular case could cause him enough trouble, given the checkmating threat and the other possibilities. White can just do it and then prepare an even e4 break in the center. If it ever happens that knight e4 actually goes on against you, I don't think you should worry too much. And the reason why is because if black advances with knight to the e4, we can even exchange, recaptures, play with the move of bishop to c4, and approach against the f7 quickly. So, this is very, very powerful. It's a good activity. We have a nice tension against the opponent, and we're doing it great. So, let's take a look and actually realize what are the other versions on how black can play that sequence. Well, one thing that can happen in case of knight at the d7 is that, besides this, going back, is that he may not play with the d5 or this lineup overall. But the bishop g5, many people are scared of the possible jump that black may choose by bringing his own knight on the e4. Now, would I say that this jump is something you should be concerned about? Absolutely. Would I say you should be worried or threatened by it? No, not specifically. And here's the reason why not. The move is good. It confronts the bishop. it helps black to activate his pieces. The problem of it, however, is that it fails in the fundamental rule that one is supposed to follow, and this is exactly that. In order to engage into tactics of that kind, and improve successfully, you need to have enough preparation and setup as it goes. So after e3, knight d7, and most likely in that position the move of knight to the d2 or even bishop d3, we see that the knight in fact didn't do anything all that special, and yet his pawn on e7 cannot move due to the queen. His bishop may move, but then the knight on e4 by itself is going to be actually weakened. So in case he plays for bishop g7, there is an exchange and knight g5 opportunity. Remember that the best idea of this opening, nevertheless, is the chance to develop and challenge black in the center. That can go in different ways. One set of opportunities, like right now, here playing the move c4, attacking d5 in different ways, and actually preparing ourselves to challenge him even more. Queen b3, rook c1, and so on and so forth. Looking at this from this way against black, you get to see how hard that may turn out for him. So I suppose that some people would just say, all right, but what if black, Valerie, what if black just plays normal knight f6, bishop g5, and just g6, for instance? Now, this actually goes back to the idea of why bishop g5 is so important, and it's even played before c4. It creates a strong positional threat that may become very real and yet very dangerous against black. What I'm really talking about is the exchange. An exchange in the f6 not only creates double pawns, which is definitely a bit of a problem for black, but the biggest problem that he is going to have to experience is that now white can very quickly accustom like his own pawns and pieces with the ability to attack against the black center. If black's e-pawn was there, he could have actually pushed it forward and defend d5 in a natural manner. However, right now, that pawn is missing, which really means that white's got a great chance to counter black's center, exchange some of his pawns, and really lead a very successful attack. You can see that now, pretty much after the move of knight c3, black has to accept and exchange z4. If he doesn't, in any other case, white can trade and play queen b3. As it often goes with any pawn weaknesses, the biggest problem of them being there is that they will be constantly challenged, pressured, and attacked by the opponent. So the thing is that now white has queen b3, setting up a threat versus both the d5, b7, and you could see how difficult that is going to be for black. The side effect of the weaknesses is clearly visible. A possible exchange now or in a few moves is fine, but then no pawns have actually remained for black in that position. In that sense, he may be good, but like his strategy is going to be severely limited. For instance, after we see short castles, f5, and potentially b4, we realize about the value of moves of queen b3, the both rooks really getting together, and an idea of b5 or even d5. If you think about black, his only counterplay is going to be with the move of f4, and yet if we take that away from him, oftentimes by just protecting d4, or sometimes even by maneuvering the light squared bishop on a fianchetto, he doesn't have any play. And this I find most exciting. If black is left with practically no counterplay, while we just keep on going at the queen side, sooner or later, things are going to end up really painful for him. So this is why some chess players like to consider the ability to avoid exchanging, possibly by doing knight d7, after which they want to play g6 as opposed to e6. This also works, but then there's another drawback. See, black can't escape all of them. The other drawback is that now the queen side feels better for white, as the black bishop is actually missing some of the most valuable squares, like d6 and e7, that will give him a more firm command on that diagonal. If this is actually the way to go, in case of bishop to the d3, short castles, everything looks good. If black plays alongside the move of rook to the e8, white can do c4 now. Beware of this. Don't allow the black pawn to ever reach e5. If you do, that could cause some problems. So by playing a move like c4, we exercise more attention instantly against the black pawn on d5, therefore preventing his ability to advance there and make anything that tactical. If black advances with c6, white can do c takes to the d5, c takes to the d5, and possibly rook c1. Now e5 wouldn't even work all this well, simply because if he does do it, it's d takes to the e5, knight takes to the e5, and then the move of knight takes to the e will be followed by a very effective challenge. Push the black rook away, and then eventually get to block the isolated pawn that he wouldn't have so much of a protection upon. It's a really exciting version on how that could work. Even in case black encompass a move like c5 in order to play b6 and try double fianchetto, still the absence of that bishop and its control on the diagonal is going to be experienced. White can play b4, and now there's this very sweet little trap going and becoming possible after rook b1. You could see that now if black simply goes back and plays for some rook b8 type of move, it really wouldn't work simply because of the exchange, take, and then bishop to the f4, which kills off the exchange. If he moves, we win the bishop. If he doesn't, we just win the exchange, and black will be losing anyway. I love that setup. I love it also because whatever change or shift black actually attempts in this position, it's always going to connect with some difficulty on the queen side. One good example is after rook b1, if black attempts queen to the c7, white can exchange, capture, play bishop f4, and after that very quickly open the center. We wouldn't be able to do this type of opening if there was no context behind that. But then there's so much. Queen e2, rook c1, knight b3. If those pawns, those four pawns exchange each other, every important piece for white, including his bishops, the knight, and the heavy pieces, are simply going to transform into a lethal piece or little force that just keeps going against black and keeps pressing him even more backward. And that's one of the big reasons why I love the Tory. Now, what goes in case black attempts to try and play differently? Some people would say, okay, this is against d5. d5 is good for white. What if black attempts to play, say, different? For instance, King's Indian, or similar systems with g6 but without d5. The good news is that whatever the opponent plays, you shouldn't bother too much because the structure and the strategy very often remains the same. In this particular case, though, we're definitely going to love playing e4, because that could give us a chance to develop, and white adopts something that would look very similar to the King's Indian, but not really. It's just a similarity. The whole idea is that while the center is supported, white can very effectively castle, set out the queen, and bring together the two rooks. By basically getting all the two rooks connected and to centralize, he can very effectively open the position in the middle with moves like knight c4, e5, or others that will just be what, white needs to be. It's lovely to see a sequence of that kind really being applied in such a fast manner, knowing that black is not conditioned to really confront or do something well against this. If black eventually advances and exchanges, we stay well. If he doesn't, we also stay well. Even in case black attempts to play with knight d7 and e5, we're just going to castle, and everything is good. Usually the white plan, since now kingside does not actually work, is often going to be around the center. This feels like the area of the board where white's got more pieces, and shortly after he sets up the two rooks and the knight, we can see a certain tension happening instantly versus black's e5 pawn. A possible exchange is going to simply reaffirm white's abilities in the center and the perfect way for him to develop the rest of his pieces. Knight c4, queen d2, rook e1, rook c1, and possibly e5. I just love the way on how this simply looks for white. So I encourage you to try this opening out. It has worked